She's going to the restroom. So wait just a minute for everybody. Yeah.
Why do we have
She's running. Okay, so the title of this panel is Planning for the Unexpected. And I think we'll start by having the panelists introduce themselves, maybe saying a few words on the topic, but what I'd like to make this kind of an interactive activity. So what I'm thinking of doing is having us all brainstorm a little bit about all the possible things we can think of that could unexpectedly go wrong. And then we'll pick some to work on talking about how we would deal with them, either how we would prevent them or solve them or cope. Let's start at the far end and introduce yourself and say a little bit about planning for the unexpected.
I'm Sean McCoy. Most of my convention experience is in facilities. By my daytime job, I'm a lawyer, so that's a lot about planning for contingencies. I also sometimes teach law students, and I think the experience is the same because most of what we teach and most of what we're going to share is based on mistakes we've made or things we've participated in that have gone wrong despite our planning.
Hi, I'm Jill Eastlake. Been around a long time, much longer than I feel the age of. I used to be a software development manager, but they retired me because of my gray hair. It's hiding. Yeah, I've worked a whole bunch of WorldCons at this point and a couple of regionals, and all kinds of stuff happens. You'd be amazed.
I'm Tammy Coxen. I was most recently division head for member services at Dublin, and I was the chair of the 2014 NASFIC in Detroit. I like to describe my approach to convention running as putting out smoke. So you never want to let things get to a fire. So it's all about, you know, being really vigilant and watching for those first signs of something that could go wrong so that you can head it off before it actually does.
My name is Leslie Turek. I've been in fandom even longer than Jill. Only a little. I ran a WorldCon a long time ago, and in the months leading up to the WorldCon, I developed very colorful dreams where I would imagine every possible disaster that could occur. And then later on, I participated in writing a game about running conventions where we tried to come up with as many possible weird things going wrong as we could and make them entertaining. So that's my background and things that can go wrong. I want to ask, because we can't put up our brainstorming sheets behind us here, so I think the people online aren't going to be able to see them. And because I cannot get a microphone over there, I wonder if there's anybody in the audience who can print quickly, who would volunteer to be our scribe. And people who are online will at least read them off if you can't see them. And you're certainly welcome to use the chat box to throw in some of your own, and hopefully we'll catch them. So just to let people know, when we're brainstorming, we're not going to do a long discussion right now. We're just going to collect ideas. So we want something short and sweet that we can put up on the board as a situation that could occur. And we'll move as quickly as we can through as many as we can. What is your name, please? I'm sorry. Kelly? To make sure that Kelly can keep up. So I see some hands.
I'm going to start first. My name's Dale Mazzola, and I'm, at the time, was the chair of Marcon. And what happens on the Thursday before your convention when your author guest of honor dies?
Okay. GOH dies is what we'll put on the board. Anybody else? And
First day of your convention, while you're finishing setup, the early season snowstorm comes in and drops 2 feet of snow.
2 feet of snow. And I bet you we could expand that into what?
Hurricanes, tornadoes,
Weather.
acts of God.
Weather
Yep,
act of God.
Weather. Okay.
Helen from Chicago, Seattle. When you find out about less than 2 months before your convention that the hotel has gotten rid of the entire convention center part of your hotel
Okay.
to put in a water park.
Okay. So facilities, losing a section of your facilities.
Been there, done that.
Losing facilities. One of my dreams was your local politician has decided to run for president and he's taken over your main meeting room. Preempted. And that actually happened at one of our local conventions. But losing facilities, okay.
Okay, not unrelated to the unexpected storm, but in 2011, on day 0 of conjecture in San Diego, power went out across San Diego County and parts of several adjacent counties.
Losing power. Okay. And those of you here on the panel, you have anyone to throw in?
We might as well just put in somebody on the committee dying,
Yeah.
or maybe you kind of wish they would have.
Committee dying, or just getting ill, or you know,
Losing a key committee member.
losing. Yeah, Icon disappears.
And we were talking in the hallway about having collected all of the info to print signs, but none are printed.
Okay, so day of con, no signs ready.
And Phil just wrote in and said, you find yourself co-chairing an EasterCon with 6 months to go. The previous committee have pretty much done nothing, and then the beginning, but still a huge potential effect.
Wait, no, you jumped.
Okay, sorry. You find yourself co-chairing an EasterCon with 6 months to go. The previous committee have pretty much done nothing and are in the process of resigning.
Isn't that pretty much losing committee though?
Yeah, so losing
I think that's
committee.
Inheriting a convention with not enough time.
And then Marguerite wrote in, I was at a convention once which had an outbreak of norovirus.
Okay.
Luckily toward the end rather than the beginning, but still a huge potential effect.
Say norovirus or
Illness?
Illness.
And then
Mass illness.
yeah, mass illness. And then e.g. new restrictions on amateur food handling, which affect parties.
Okay, so local regulation change, related might be union, fire marshal union issues, all of that.
Children unaccompanied issues.
Yeah, so someone was up here, I'm sorry.
No, that was her reading.
Oh, okay,
I had an idea. I can't remember what it was.
okay.
Come back to me.
Okay, and then now there's another one from Marissa Powers. In 2015, we had our one-day SAT event at a public park, would have been 3rd year there, and the park head canceled our event on Friday morning via an email to have his pet group take over the venue. Even the city councilman couldn't get the event back for us.
Okay, that's losing facilities, just a little bit more colorful facility. I've got one, your equipment supplier doesn't come through. You ordered X things and whatever type of equipment, and they suddenly say, sorry, we can't supply it.
No program books at the beginning of the convention.
Publisher, yeah. Program, you can add under that a publisher, program book publisher,
Publications missing.
publications
I
missing.
mean, many cons have been faced that day one.
Yeah.
Example from TourCon 3, published schedule bears no resemblance to reality.
Let's not talk about New Orleans past.
We don't have to mention which convention this was. We have someone on the floor, Mike.
We had one occasion where there was a suicide in the consuite.
Oh man.
And I am super grateful I was not helping run that convention that year. And then the other, we were talking about like unaccompanied children, but we've also had situations where children were reported missing. And basically the entire convention had to mobilize to try to find the kid.
Missing child. We've got a bunch on the
Yeah,
internet. Where are we going here?
a
We got-
couple more showed up. Esther says, guest of honor posts inflammatory posts about a convention member, calling them an imbecile. Guest of honor also turns out to be very much contrary to the convention's ethos.
Okay, let's say guest misbehavior as a generalization of that one.
Okay. And then Petrea Mitchell wrote in, substantially more people showing up than you planned for.
That's all.
And back to the floor.
Ruth from Portland. We were at a convention a number of years back where the hotel closed the convention midway due to alleged damage by convention members.
Oh.
There were interesting results.
Yeah.
So this is legal. Oh, geez, I don't even know how to categorize that one. Oh, let's just say hotel shut down convention. You can start. There's another sheet there if you're running out of space. It's
sort of
kind of losing facilities, but in a
particularly egregious way.
yeah.
Then you leave.
We had the unfortunate circumstance of a minor got accosted, sexually molested in the con suite. And that is legal. That is a minor. That is none of your business to everyone else. This is a minor that is grabbing the handy dandy police officer dealer's room and say, you stand outside here because if you know about this, you are a mandated reporter. I went, never mind, we're not doing that part of it yet.
Yeah,
but
yeah. So how would you characterize that as in a generic sense? It would be a
Con tragedy.
It,
That's
well,
what's up there now.
it's
Legal matter.
yeah,
legal
it's
matter.
a crime.
It's a crime.
A crime.
It's a real life crime. It
sensitive-
is not a sensitive
A
one.
sensitive crime.
And code of conduct, you can have all the code of conducts you want, but if this is the first time, this is you learning how to deal with it like on the fly, which
Okay.
is uncomfortable.
Thanks. And
Riffing on what the previous person said here, I was at a convention and we're in the hotel and we're having the room parties and that sort of thing. They weren't particularly rowdy or anything like that, except nobody had told the night manager that there was a convention happening at the hotel. And he comes up to, to sort of walk around the floors and sees people standing outside rooms and inside rooms and talking and having a good time. And he went completely ballistic.
Right. Parties being shut down.
so hotel security issues.
Yeah.
Severe lack of communication. It's like,
Right.
we're like, there is a convention at this hotel. Nobody told me, therefore,
Right.
it's like,
That's when you pull out the copy of the contract that you keep in your pocket.
They don't care.
We're not solving it. We're not
We're not
solving
solving.
in the 1990s, you couldn't get a hotel to sign a contract with a non-profit.
it. Okay.
Competing events
At the same hotel,
at the same hotel,
competing events.
such as
Hockey children.
wrestling children, tiny tot dancers, and tiny tot fashion shows.
Oh.
Okay.
High status non-con person being put onto the party floor.
How about that just be the airline pilot?
Right.
Okay. So party noise complaint kind of situation.
Blocking failure.
Sorry, I apologize. I came in late, so I don't know the criteria. Is this things happening at con or just prior to?
It could be just prior.
Okay. Yeah, the two I can come up with is one con-chair was driving past a hotel about 4 months out from the con and noticed that it wasn't there.
Oh boy.
I think that's up there as
That's
losing facilities, but in a particularly
It's
dramatic
definitely losing
fashion.
facilities. And the other one was I sent my my room exhibits display person to measure up a room for the bridge set that we had. And she trots up to the hotel and goes, I'm here to, this is about, again, 4 months out. And I'm here to measure the room. What room? Well, the room we're having the bridge set at. What bridge set? For the convention that's happening in 4 months' time? What convention? Basically, the previous hotel manager hadn't been paid in 3 months. So when he'd left abruptly, he'd taken the computer that had all their reservation details, including the fact that they were hosting a convention.
So it's
in about
basically
4 months.
hotel management malfunction.
Serious hotel
I mean,
mismanagement.
Do we have hotel strike?
Oh,
Oh,
do that.
yeah.
Yes, that's happening.
hotel strike.
Hotel
Labor
strike?
strike.
Liz-
Yeah,
yeah.
but
that's a little
more
different.
I mean,
complicated.
okay,
than that.
so we spent 15 minutes. We could probably keep going. But I wonder now if we might want to, obviously, we're not going to have time to talk about all of these. And before I came here, I did a quick read, 1 or 2 pages on risk management as a professional skill. And what they apparently do is you look at each thing and you say, how likely is this to happen? And you also look at what will be the cost to us if this happens. So thinking about that, which of these do you feel we should spend some time talking about solutions for? I don't know how we should do this. Go through them all and have hands raised, or
How about an A, B, C, and you can vote?
Huh?
A, B, and C, and people could vote. So lots of A's, lots of B's, lots of C's.
or
Or
we could mill around for a few minutes, and I could give out markers, and people could mark the ones they
Quick
like.
dot storm. Do a quick dot storm.
Yeah. So let everybody pick
3
three.
dots. Yeah.
All right. Let me get my
Well-
markers.
okay.
So do you guys know what we're gonna do? So you get a marker, go up and put a dot or a star or some sort of symbol next to the 3 things that you want to talk about. And then we'll look and see which ones have the most dots. And that's the ones that we'll do the next step on.
It's just at least like that's not people outside. That's fun.
Online people, if you want to put 3 things down, we'll mark them for you. Get a little exercise in.
I used to be co-chair of the New Zealand.
I'm sorry. That's fine.
I'll admit that. Yeah, it's right here.
Do we have folks online have put up anything? Do we need to dot for people online? Oh, somebody's typing in the list. Good.
Oh, okay.
Oh, smart. He can't get up.
So put a star by the suicide, illness, and the dreadful PR crisis. I'm guessing there's a popular one. And then another one by the facility disappearing.
You don't. You call the cops
Okay, put a star next to the suicide,
after they've stopped. Right. Yeah.
the illness, so the norovirus, and the dreadful PR crisis.
We had a show where I was running our show.
And now another one next to facility disappearing.
And folks online, we are in the process of typing in a list of what's on the
And
board.
then another one by the suicide and the criminal incidents.
Great.
And then Esther said, thanks, Maud.
Couldn't do that.
scooch to one side. I know you're trying to dot, but they're trying to type. That's about half the list that's already in the chat. There's more coming once the typer can see the.
Somebody says Concom member leaves. Local regulation changes. Vendor failure. Did you get the vendor failure? Okay.
That list down there, Kelly, is the ones we're typing in.
Oh, we're all going to have a time. That's he's typing in everything.
Another one says, please star local regulation changes. PR failure. And a sensitive crime occurring.
Yeah, we don't really have PR failure up there. We probably should. It's a big one. That would have been the smart thing to do. Take a picture and put it into the chat.
Well, I thought of that, but I wasn't sure how to get it into the chat.
Right. That's a good question. Right.
Because I could get it on my phone, but he's typing.
Yeah.
Well, I think, part of the function of this list, even if we don't discuss each thing, is to at least give people ideas about what to think about in their own committees. But let's, Kelly, could you, yeah, you're doing that. Good.
That's far enough to not be a chair.
Ahead of me. So the three that seem to have the highest choice is losing facilities, mass illness, and a tragedy happening at the con, either a crime, suicide, or missing children, something of that nature. So let's start with losing facilities. Obviously, this has a lot of variations. How far ahead of time, how much of your facilities, but let's just leave it open. Would anybody on the panel like to make a first stab at how to approach this?
Well, it's a legal issue sometimes.
Yeah, blame the lawyer. Well, we've all lost facilities. The first thing is it depends on when you lose them. Do you have a contract? How far out are you? What does your contract say? Every contract that a hotel gives you or the center gives you is going to have what's called a force majeure clause, but the hotel tearing down or the facility tearing down its own facilities isn't force majeure. The problem is once you decide to invoke your contract and start fighting about your contract, what you're dealing with is measure of damages, which is what are your actual losses, how have you mitigated your losses, and who are you going to get to fund damages and give you something that you can go get payment from. In other words, once you decide to invoke the law and go to court or go to arbitration, you don't help your convention at all. So if it's a sudden thing, unexpected, you're kind of scrambling, you're hoping that your hotel will help you find new facilities. If you don't have a good relationship and you're kind of out of luck, then you're going to be arguing with your hotel over damages. Anybody who's ever arranged facilities knows that one of the first things the hotel asks you is, what are you doing with the space? What kind of things are you going to have going on? How many people are you having show up? And all of this. You might think it's kind of an innocuous question, but there's an aspect of contract law called consequential damages, which means that you're entitled to damages beyond what's in the contract if it's within the reasonable expectation of the panel. of the parties. So if you're expecting 5,000 people to show up, and you can document that it's reasonably likely 5,000 people are going to show up, and the hotel screws you over so that those 500,000 people can't show up, well, that's a measure of your damages. So
That's from your point of view. There's also the point of view of the facility. So there's recently been, and I won't name the convention, a strike, and the strike may or may not have finished before the convention. So the committee decided to go to another facility, and later the first facility sued them. So you have to watch out for both ways. If you walk away from your contract with a facility, can you survive? Yeah.
I know a little about that just from what I've heard from rumor and innuendo and Mark Olson. Well, there again, so, it's like Russia. I've heard about it third hand on the whistleblower. Force majeure is like self-defense. You can invoke it, but you better be right.
And they weren't.
I have kind of an old story. Dates back to, what year was that? Well, before this century. I was struck by what you said about the hotel understanding your convention. Sometimes hotels want to back out of a contract because they discover what type of convention it is, and they think maybe they don't want this type of convention in their facility. So being really clear up front and being very careful to make sure that they know what's involved, what activities you'll be having, the fact that you'll be having room parties will lessen the chance of the hotel suddenly thinking, oh my God, we don't want to have people in costume, at our hotel, and changing their mind at the last minute. However, in the case I'm referring to where they attempted to do this, there is a step between actually going to court. There's the step where you indicate that you're willing to go to court about it. And sometimes that will actually cause them to change their mind. In other words, they think, oh, well, we'll just get rid of these people that are annoying us. And then you present them with, a 20-page brief complaint written by a fairly high-priced lawyer explaining, how we are going to sue you if you do this, will cause a turnaround, or at least a willingness to talk about it and negotiate. So that happened once, and it worked.
Yes.
But better that they know ahead of time what the situation is. Kelly, are you? Oh, go ahead.
I'm Kelly. From a point of view of trying to mitigate the possibility of losing a venue from as far out as possible, when you're negotiating the contract, I think it's very important to discuss losing the venue, what sorts of events might be considered force majeure and what wouldn't, how you plan to use the venue that you have, but also what sort of replacement you expect them to provide you with should they need to back out for another reason, where it needs to be. It's not going to do me any good if a hotel backs out and sets me up with a hotel that's not walking distance from the rest of the facilities. So just being all clear about that stuff early on, I think, is the best way to mitigate that from the future.
I'm going to take a slightly different piece of this, which is when you haven't lost your whole facility, but your facility tells you that they've taken half the program rooms out of commission. This happened to us at DETCON, and they gave us 2 unused retail spaces in the adjoining sort of building that we were in. And so, we did get some notice, fortunately, far enough out to be able to incorporate that into our program plans. But then you have to think about what are all the other implications for us. So that for us increased the wayfinding need. We had to find ways to direct people to those locations, to then think about if you have to use suboptimal locations or sort of adjacent spaces, how do you convince people to go there? So thinking through all of those kinds of options when you lose just part of your facility. And also, I guess, being aware of what's most important to your convention. If you have to jettison some something, having in the back of your mind how to prioritize those things is a way to kind of plan ahead for that.
Great. Yeah, I was just going to go to that question, so thank you. I think I'm looking at the time, and I think we need to move on to the next one. I know we've only scratched the surface here. Mass illness. So probably this is something that happens after the convention is started, and something that travels quickly, and people are not appearing for program items. What are some of the things we can do here?
Well, I'm going to take a different tack at it. I mean, when we've had a lot of like norovirus and that sort of thing, this is one of the reasons that you've seen increasingly consuites that have switched to prepackaged products, or making sure you have lots of tongs out, or having hand sanitizer. So being proactive about food safety concerns is key to avoid mass illness.
Sometimes it's not food though. Sometimes it's airborne. Yeah.
Sure. Yep. That's just one piece of it.
But good. Yeah.
Also, hand sanitizer in elevators. Those are the elevator buttons are a big transmitter.
Yeah.
What about when people start disappearing from the program?
Yeah, I've never actually experienced this, so I don't know how to fix it. But yeah, it's already happened. Yeah, you try to prevent it. It's already happened. Then what do you do? I don't know.
There we are.
Oh, no.
We've got some audience members with ideas.
Maybe they do.
I was just, in most of those cases, if it's an individual speaker, you're just going to have an empty hole. If it's on a panel and they were the moderator, if you can try and let the rest of the panelists know so they can choose a new moderator, and that's really all you can do, because the con's going to still go on.
Right.
I could see program thinking, needing to be of combining panels potentially. If you had 3 or 4 people on items and now you're down to 2 people on items, can you consolidate your program to still have something that can move forward?
And is there any pre-planning should you spend time worrying about it or planning for it if it's so unlikely to happen?
Well, this isn't mass illness, but you just inspired the thought. It sort of touches on another one, which is about storms and power and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
running conventions in the Midwest in the winter, we regularly will schedule 6 people for program items, even though that's more than you actually want on a program item, knowing that somebody, 1 or 2, are going to get hit with a snowstorm and not be able to make it to the convention.
Because that is much more likely.
Right. So that's not related, because you can't predict the mass illness, but maybe veering a little bit on the high side rather than the low side, especially maybe being aware of what's going on in your area. So if there is a norovirus outbreak, or there's a particularly bad flu season in your area, then that might inspire you to schedule a little more heavily.
And of course you could be losing committee too.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to say about the committee, it's awful when you lose panelists and participants, but when you're losing committee and you look around for somebody to help, and you have crickets, and you just really need to talk to your committee way beforehand. Does everybody have a second? Does everybody, as a chair, I do not email my department head. That mailbox goes to the head and the second at the same time, because I don't want anybody to get caught unawares, because that would be my failure. But then I have 2 people, and I at least can talk to somebody maybe on the phone and say, you've got any ideas? But on the committee side as well, it's just, you have to be flexible. You have to look at your committee. Can somebody else second step up to this? Can somebody help out that department and try it? It can be an experience where it's tough, but people will look back at it and go, we helped each other and we came out of it whole.
Jill, did you want to add anything? Because I know earlier you were talking about the whole question of backups for the committee.
Oh, I'm a huge proponent of backups, and I back myself up with sometimes 2 or 3 levels to be sure there's plenty to do, and plenty of people that you can send out in case of an emergency. And otherwise, you're just sitting around talking to each other and something happens and you can fix it. Right. Right.
Yeah, so the audience is commenting that documentation is important as well, so that if you have to pass off to another person, you have something written, some written record of what's going on.
So, yeah, and events DH list is not just 2 of us, it's probably 5 or 6 people, because we could both have a problem.
Marie, you
Yeah.
want to say something?
Yeah, I've been working on something for Con Zealand, and I've rather whimsically called it the emergency holographic fan. This is for when you get dropouts on your panels, sometimes severe dropouts. All groups of fandom have 2, 3, whatever fans who you know have been around a long time. They can talk on any subject. And basically, we have them down as EHFs, so that if need, at the last minute, you can grab them and go be on this panel, and you know they can handle it.
We're focusing a little bit too much, I think, on sort of people being out. We had a situation at Regio when I was running an art show where the entire city shut down in the middle of the convention. So we weren't sick, but what do you do? And they actually extended the convention an extra day, which is kind of cool.
Was that a weather thing?
It was a weather thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And I had little snowmen on the floor because the door opened enough that there was snow on the floor, so we fixed that.
Well, short of an earthquake, hopefully that's not going to happen.
Yeah, but neurovirus, that doesn't just affect a few people. That could take out half of the people at the convention. And then what do you do? And the hotel staff. And Bruce has his hand up.
Sometimes there's no good solution.
Right. You find out who all your doctors are.
Yeah, we had an interesting situation for World Fantasy in 2001. We were just after 9/11, and talking about half the people not showing up, et cetera, et cetera. The entire convention, of course, got severely impacted and had to go to plan B and C and D on just about everything. And contingency planning for that has got to be a little bit tough.
So you had a plan C, D?
Yes, yes. Force majeure is something we were very tempted to lean back on. It was a bargaining technique to go with the hotel. Hey, we have our friend over here, force majeure, and he's happy to talk to you about renegotiating our terms and conditions.
Right, right.
So sometimes that can be your friend.
Okay. I guess we're kind of winding down on this one. Con tragedy. Crime. I can't read this one.
Suicide,
missing child. So there's something bad that has happened. It might only affect a few people. It's something perhaps sensitive that doesn't want to be publicized, but it might impact a space or a group of people. How do we, is there any planning ahead? What planning ahead do we have to do? And how do we handle it?
I think that some of the planning ahead for this is some of the planning ahead that works for a lot of these things, in that you have a way that you want to deal with rumor control.
So that part of it is the
communications. And how do you want to deal with the possible needs of an investigation?
Part of it is dealing with officials.
And just having some of the planning in place. Because, you know, I mean, I've been through some of these things. Convention where somebody died of an overdose in their room, and they wanted to investigate a wide swath of the convention because the family was kind of blaming fandom, and but just being ready to deal with rumor containment. I think a lot of these things can be mitigated by knowing how are you going to communicate things out to all of your members, and how are you going to try to prevent misinformation?
Yeah, always a good goal.
At the survey and questionnaire panel yesterday, I was handing out my RAMs. That's my risk assessment management system, which I totally pinched off my last where it was developed for taking students off site. And it's a form that you fill out. You have, who, why, where, what, and when, and then you list all the things that can go wrong. Children disappearing, children hurting themselves. But I mean, obviously you apply it to the convention with something like this. And then next to it, you put, what are you going to do about it in the event of? And it's a thing that when in a crisis, people always go back to the last thing they wrote. And if you've got this written down, a couple of copies on file, you've got one, they've got one, you're good to go.
Right, identifying clear who's in charge in any given situation, I think would be important there.
And if anyone wants a copy, I can give them some.
Great.
Some of those issues, the planning is taken out of your hand. San Jose is a good example. There was an incident in San Jose some time before the convention with a personality that led to a lot of attention from a what do you want to call them, white supremacist type group. We 3 days before the convention, I go in to meet with the convention center, and the city police are there because their intelligence division has learned that this group is tied to a somewhat more radical white supremacist movement that had been involved in some protests up in Portland, Oregon, and they were concerned. So, it's like, well, great, you're in charge, tell us what you want to do. They staged plainclothes officers around the convention. They had 2 plainclothes officers in the convention. We gave them passes so nobody knew who they were, unless, of course, you happen to notice that, gosh, why is somebody in this day and age wearing a fanny pack? And it turned out that the actual protest was much ado about nothing. But it's the officials step in and you stand back and leave them alone. Yeah, but you're not a 30-year-old guy who looks like he's out.
So there's a question on the board now. How do you handle something like that where law enforcement may want a bigger presence than you or the original reporter may want, or where other attendees may feel unsafe with heavy law enforcement presence around? Now, in your case that you were describing, they were plainclothes, but I could see a situation where it might be a little bit more aggressive, or
the plainclothes officers were only inside the center. The uniformed officers were outside the center, and the day of the protest, we were directing our people to try and go, for the most part, out other doors than in front of the protest where it was scheduled to occur. If you're in a municipal center, you are going to, in any kind of center, you're going to do what the owner of the facility tells you you're going to do. And my own feeling, as I said at the beginning, I'm a lawyer, I'm actually a government prosecutor for the state of California. So, you do what law enforcement on the scene tells you to do because it's going to save you more hassles in the long run. That's just what you have to do.
So I think, again, it comes down to communicating with your attendees about what's going on and how they should handle it. I wonder if it also would help to identify ahead of time who on your committee would be best equipped to be the liaison or the interface. I know that I haven't had any experience with dealing with law enforcement, but I have been in situations with fire marshals. And we were extremely lucky that we had someone who had been a fire person and knew the language, knew how to talk to people, knew how to explain what was happening in terms that they would understand. And it helped smooth the wheels incredibly to have someone who could talk their language. And I imagine the same thing is true with law enforcement, that if you can identify somebody on your committee who has some law enforcement background and knows the language and knows what they will need, you're a lot better off. So that's some of the pre-planning I think that could be done, is just knowing who those people are to be called on in case of the need.
Right, and that could be people on your committee or just people in the community. So some of the things I wrote down, knowing who your lawyers are, like maybe you don't have a convention lawyer on tap, but if you know who the lawyers are in the committee who could make appropriately worded statements. People who are connected to law enforcement speak that language. Folks who talk to labor
I was just going to say labor.
but also knowing who your social workers, mental health counselors, people at the convention who maybe could be mobilized to do crisis management in the situation of something like suicide.
I'm envisioning now like a resource directory that you have. This is a great idea. I like this. Of people you can call on when an emergency happens. Who knows about what? Health, if there's a health issue.
Right. Who are the doctors?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you may not ever need to use these people, but knowing who they are and being able to contact them could be a big help in when something arises. So I think that's a good idea.
I had a situation where I had a health issue, and rather than stay home by myself, I actually went to convention. And in the con suite, I was telling my friends about the situation because it wasn't obvious. And there happened to be a pediatrician nearby who heard me, and she kept an eye on me for the rest of the week. Really appreciated that. So you don't necessarily have to plan for it, but it's a good idea to plan for it.
And I think that it's sort of speaks to the value of considering our types of conventions. How do you create community so that when you need to draw upon someone to help the convention or help in a particular situation, people feel comfortable doing that. So, you know, that just community building and building those connections is important.
Kelly?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit to the international convention committees that have become quite common lately, and it's important to understand that the relationship between the general public and law enforcement changes from culture to culture, that the laws are different, that contract laws are different, that responsibilities are different, and although you might know exactly how to handle a situation where you're from, that could well not be appropriate where you are. And if you're not in your home place, you need to check.
Yeah.
I want to address the missing child thing because that sort of thing happens a lot. And rather than necessarily telling 5,000 people to go look for this kid, maybe you have a way of reaching someone in every area of your convention, the exhibit hall, the program rooms, etc., so that you have trusted staff and you can tell them to look out for this child, and they probably will find them rather than alarming 5,000 people.
On the board, someone makes the point, which I think we all agree on, is on this resource list, these people, you know, unless they know they could be called on and are willing to be called on.
That's great.
Yeah. So we're getting.
Oh, they're going to give us a 10-minute warning.
They're going to give us a 10-minute warning soon. So do you want? Is there anything anyone on the panel really wants to make sure they have a chance to say before we wrap up?
Okay. Well, the way I usually handle things, and I think I sort of said it before, hire people, hire lots of people, hire more people than you know that you need, and make sure that they know what they're doing, or if they don't, that you know that, and make sure that you hire people who are better than you at other things, and sometimes who don't agree with you because they will see stuff that you won't.
I'm going to talk really quickly to one of the other points on the wall, which was vendor failure. So this year at Dublin, we had our primary Moby supplier had a fire in their facility and did not tell us. We had reserved 30 Mobys through them and 20 of them disappeared in the fire. And so they didn't tell us. We didn't find out until we reached out to them to confirm that we had them, and then all of a sudden we had to scramble to find new ones. So checking in with your vendors regularly and making sure you're kind of building key critical checkpoints so that you can scramble if you need to.
Good, thank you, Tammy, because I was going to bring up vendor failure. But I think I'm going to make a more general point, which is this was kind of a fun exercise, and this is something that all of you can do within your own committees. go back and, you know, as you're planning for a convention, maybe have a day or an hour where you do this. What are all the things that could happen? What are we going to do? How are we going to prevent them? Situation. And I think it's useful exercise. And some of them, you know, have pretty reasonable solutions if you just take the time to think about them. You know, with a vendor failure, as you said, check in with people. Maybe make sure you know an alternate source if you have to go to that alternate source. Many of them do have kind of reasonable, simple solutions, but it's just a matter of thinking about it ahead of time and taking the time to think about it. Would the audience have any other questions for us?
Or statements?
Or statements? At this point, we're open to anything at this point. Let's see here. We've got something here. Wonder if this is. Oh, okay.
Helen, you were the one talking about the suicide in the consuite. What was the response? Like, what did the convention do in response to that?
Yeah.
So I was not involved in running the con. However, Ron, our SMOFCon chair, was actually the chair of that convention. So he would be somebody to check in about that. I was attending. I wasn't part of it. So.
But from your perspective, I mean, what did you see? What was?
Well, my recollection, it was a long time ago. But you know, obviously the consuite shut down. You know, and I think there was just a lot of kind of what you were talking about, Kim, just trying to keep as much privacy as possible for, you know, family and providing support for people who had been in the room, you know, when they found him and that sort of thing. But the details are super hazy. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, and probably they're hazy because everybody was trying to keep it private.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that they did really, really well was keep it private, but they also realized children's programs on the other end of the hall. You had to go by the consuite. And yeah, now you've got parents with, what's wrong? My kid is down there.
Right.
You can try and stop a parent whose kid is down there, but you're not going to be successful. And therefore, they really fast made a way for parents to go collect children or to stay in children's programming with the children. And they handled that great. I was there, my granddaughter was down there, and they were great. They were like, we'll just go down, you'll collect her and we'll walk you back out. So they really handled things with parents and children. Awesome.
And one thing that I'm just going to add is, like we've been talking about, how do you plan for these things ahead? And a lot of times you can't plan for them ahead. So putting into place, what's the structure for how we do crisis management at the convention? So
yes.
What are our communications methods? Like when something goes wrong, how do we immediately pull together the people who need to be in the room to make the decisions to quickly deal with the situation? Yes. And that's something you can plan ahead.
That's the Rams. I was just going to get up and say, know your laws. You know, what happens for reporting things to the police in America is different to New Zealand, is different to Ireland, is different to Finland. Yeah, know your laws, know how it works for you. And then, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, because everybody's watched cop shows growing up, and that's the way they think it all happens. But know what happens.
I think one of your resources is going to be your list of vendors that you looked at, and you said we wanted to get Mobies from this vendor because they could provide the most at the best price. You have your second choice, that when the first one falls through because of the warehouse fire, you can say, well, let's try the second one because I still have all their information right here. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we didn't look at was overattendance, but if you had planned, we could expand into this space. Then if half your facility is taken away from you, maybe you go into that expansion space as an emergency backup. So keep track of all that, even if you aren't actually using it. It's in your list that you can refer to it in an emergency.
Right. Well, I think we've reached the end. Thank you all so much. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience. Thank you, people online.